Good morning, everyone. Good to have you guys. Yes, this week is our second word of Lutheran vocabulary. Do you guys remember what last week was? I said it during my announcements. This is a test as law, right? And what is the Lutheran understanding of the law? There are two uses, right? We talked about the two uses of the law. Do you guys remember what the first use of the law was? To convict us, right? The first use of the law, which, by the way, is probably the easiest one to identify in some way, shape, or form. It convicts us, right? When we understand the rules, the regulations. You know, last week, like good confirmation students, you reduced everything to the 10 Commandments, right? We have those. We also remember that the law is given as a gift. It's given as a gift to prevent what? Harm to ourselves or harm to others, right? And so it is given as a gift, but what the law does to us in its first use is it also convicts us. It reminds us, it lets us know when we've messed up, right? Oftentimes, it also comes out in our what? In our conscience, right? Over the years, we've got these beautiful cartoon illustrations of little angels and devils that sit on our shoulders. That's a great example of how the first use works. But what is the second use of the law? As we are entrenched in the first use, as we are convicted into the law, what is the second use? Because the law is never there to just stand in and of itself. It's also there to do something. And Luther was the one to help us understand that it does what? It takes us to whom? To Christ, right? It takes us to Christ. The law convicts us, and the law forces us to our Savior, right? So today we're going to talk about sin. I'm glad we actually talked about law first. Because today we're going to talk about sin and how do we identify sin? What is the meaning of sin? How did Luther identify sin? And what does it do to us, and what is the response to it? So Laura's back in the sound booth. She's going to hit play. This is our Luther House video. Just a couple minutes on the word sin. Just enough time for me to eat my donut.
When people hear the word sin, they often associate it with breaking one of the commandments. While this is true, Luther understood that God isn't concerned with your actions alone, but something much deeper, your heart. The depth of God's concern is found at the end of the 10 Commandments, when God says, "I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God." Jealousy, as we all know, is rooted in the heart. What God is saying with these words and in all of Scripture is that He wants your heart all to Himself. That's what the first commandment is all about. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. Jesus summarized it in this way: love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. When Luther unpacked the concept of sin as it's set forth in Scripture, he recognized that the root, the power of all sin is found in the breaking of the first commandment. Think about it. When you break commandments 2 through 10, you are basically saying to God, "No thanks, I'll do it my way. I'll live by my own rules." This is why Luther said that when push comes to shove, the only sin is unbelief, and your actions are simply symptoms of the same disease. You don't believe that God is in charge. Paul sets this forth quite clearly in the first chapter of his letter to the Romans, when he speaks of sin as worshiping the creature rather than the Creator, and lists symptoms of that disease. And Jesus says as much when he says, "The Spirit will convince the world of sin, because they do not believe in me." Luther recognized this scriptural understanding of sin can be startling, but he also knew it's a deadly serious business. It's only in being honest about the depth of our sin that we can come to know the depth of God's mercy in forgiving us. All of this was said and done so you can remember, a mighty fortress is our God.
Thank you, Laura. So kind of our opening centering questions are this. Sin. What is it and how deep does it go? If we ask the average person on the street to identify sin, they'll usually talk about what Luther called the little flea bites, the minor infractions that we commit against God and against one another. As we'll discover, though, Luther recognized those sins as well as others are simply symptoms of the ultimate sin. The ultimate sin was what? Unbelief, right? Unbelief or not trusting God. And when we don't trust God, we commit little and big sins alike. So let's start there. Let's get a little interactive. I want you guys to take a couple moments. I want you guys, Mark, I'm going to force you to come on over to the crowd. Come on over, come up in a moment here. And, you guys already lined yourselves up. That's good. Talk to a couple people around you. I can make you really vulnerable. Talk about talk about a sin you've done lately. And if you don't want to do that, let's just talk about those flea bite sins. Let's talk about what you identify as sin. Go. Oh, Mark, come on over. Come on over. Come hang out with Nancy and I. Come on. That's the last time you sit in the front row. Isn't that where the best students, most engaged students sit? Right? I got to go back live because we're recording these things. What are the sins? Mabel? No, just kidding. I'm not going to pick on anyone in particular. Mabel, Shirley, Shar, name your sin. No, okay. Let's talk about sins. What do we, when you guys hear the word sin, when we talk about sins, the church is good about talking about sins. I don't even know if the culture talks about sin much anymore. I mean, the three-letter word of it, right? Oh, we talk about sin all the time, but we don't necessarily call it that. But when you hear the word sin, what do you think about? Doing things I shouldn't do. Sure. Oh, I should be on time. Yeah, Mabel, you should help no, actually my daughters and my wife were very on time today. I think this is the first time ever she heard the announcements. We joke about it at home. It's not shots fired. Okay, it's shots fired. I'm in a world of hurt this afternoon. Honey-do list is coming out. No. Being on time, sure. But let's go further. What other sins? Reg? Oh, swearing. Oh, I'm guilty. Swearing, right? Fun fact. You want a fun fact? Your pastor never said a swear word until he was in 7th grade. Yeah, I never did. I was terrified of my mother. Right? And I was getting made fun of it. I was getting made fun of for it at the lunch table one day. I was telling my dad about this that evening. We were on our way back from baseball practice, and my dad goes, Craig, you know what? Here's the deal. If you stub your toe or you hit yourself with a hammer or something happens and you just let out the word of words, it's okay. He said, I just don't want you to swear at people. He said, because swearing at someone is disrespectful. My father, I'm not going to blame him, but he opened a floodgate of possibility. Right? And what's hilarious is if you see my dad and I around each other, especially at the shooting range, it could be glorious, right? I mean, but now as a father, when I hear my daughters let something out, I will say this, they're very creative and it's hard not to smile. It's not hard, but But at the same time, are there certain things they should not be saying? Absolutely, right? And is that a reflection upon my wife? Is it a reflection upon me? Of course, right? We always like to chuckle who made him who done it first, right? No. Thanks, Red. Swearing. What else? You guys, Kavislins, I think you were jumping in. Gossiping. Okay. She said it. I didn't, right? It starts just like that. That's beautiful. So that's exactly. Well, actually, yeah. Once you point it out, oh, no, I didn't do it. That was Nadine said it, right? Mm-hmm. What else? Who else? Being judgmental. Possibly. I'm kind of curious. That's a big, loaded word. Linda, do you want to share more?
I just was telling you, I had guests the other night, and I don't think I was ready personally to have anyone in my house that night. And they came in with just distasteful to me.
Okay.
The smoke rolling in and whatever.
Oh.
But the longer I got to talk with them, the better I felt about it.
Sure.
I knew it was my problem, not theirs.
Sure. So some guests that you weren't sure of when they first came in, right? We can test that word judgmental or judgment later. We can test that a little bit because I'm pretty sure you also heard in Scripture and in sermons over the last few weeks that we actually are called to judge a brother or sister in Christ, right? Condemn is a different word. To condemn someone is not our role or our place. But are we called to judge? We are called to judge, but we're also called to a lot of kindness and compassion with that too, right? So maybe if we take it a step further and say how we express our judgment on others could be definitely an expression of sin, right? They got the kindness they needed. You just weren't sure you were ready, right? Okay, fair. Janet, were you saying? Impatience. How so?
Well, because it causes me to do things that are not, to think things that are not good.
Okay. When we are impatient, we express it different ways, different emotions, things like that, right? Good. So what would we classify? I mean, these are all great examples of sin. What would we classify those as? You know, what did Luther kind of classify those as?
Well, you talk about jealousy, envy, and that clip a little bit. I can see where that would lead to covetousness.
Jealousy and envy, covetousness.
Yes, would lead to that.
Could, right? Well, actually, what was really interesting in the video is it talked about who's jealous. Who's jealous? God. So if God is a jealous God, should we say jealousy is sin? That's tricky, isn't it? What is he jealous of? Let's be clear there. What is he jealous of? He is the creator. We are the created. He is jealous for your attention, and he is jealous for the relationship with you, rather than our relationship with what or whom? Other things, other people, other stuff, right? So God is a jealous God. Yes, the human example of jealousy, covetousness, very quickly turns into sin. Why? Because especially when we act upon it, we rarely act upon it in a way that is bettering our neighbor, correct? Right. Well, we talked about these sins, as we're listing these sins, you know, Martin Luther would call those the flea bites. What does that mean? Maybe out here we call them chiggers. Any of you have chiggers? Oh my gosh, I've had them too many times in the last couple years, and my ankles and my knees just, what does a chigger feel like, a chigger bite? Irritation, right? You gonna go to the doctor for it though? You get out the wife's nail polish, paint the rainbows on your legs. You know, no. Hopefully you find the clear bottle of nail polish, then you don't have to talk about it, right? Do you guys even know what I'm talking about? Nail polish on your chigger bites. It's beautiful, beautiful. You don't have to go to the doctor for that typically, right? Are you gonna die from it? I mean, if someone has, I've yet to hear it, but right? We're not talking about something mortal, so to speak. But is it a nuisance? Can it keep you up at night? Painful? Irritating? Yeah. I mean, it literally leaves a wound, right? So do the flea bite sins, so to speak. Mark, you and I had an interesting conversation up here. You went from the flea bites to what? You're talking about disbelief. In the video, it talks about disbelief. But let's be careful when we say that, because we can go from the flea bite sins, the nuisance sins, the quick to identify things, and we can jump to the other extreme and say, yeah, those that don't believe in God, the disbelief, the unchurched, the atheists, so to speak. We can go to the extreme there. We can say, well, that's a more mortal sin, right? If you don't believe in God, then you are going where? Right? I mean, in the practical sense, the argument that has stood the test of time is that if you don't believe in God, you are going to hell, right? Luther helped us very quickly understand that we too, on a daily basis, have the ability to express our disbelief in God, right? So let's be clear. For Luther, the definition of sin is what? Just said it. Unbelief. Unbelief. What does that mean? It's not really a trick question. What's that?
Great contempt of the first commandment. Seems like it starts.
Well, I would say it's every single commandment. Let's talk about what is the first commandment? See, we always remember the judgment part. What's the first part of it? I am the Lord your God. Remember, it's actually a promise. It's a gift. The beginning of the commandments actually starts with God declaring who he is. In fact, if you go back even before that, the verses, God gives the Israelites a declaration of who he is and what he did for them. I am the one that heard your cries in the wilderness. I am the one that heard your cries in slavery in Egypt, and I am the one that brought you out of Egypt and set you free. I am the Lord your God. And then what? You shall have no other gods before me. So if the root of true sin is disbelief, let's be vulnerable. How maybe have we expressed our disbelief that God is the only God in our life? There's so many things, Nancy. Give me one. So many times in which we put God number two and so many things so many other things in the spot of God, right? Family, our kids, our work, our play, right? I will say this boldly, I do not believe in atheism. I don't. I can buy into the argument of the atheists that say they struggle to talk about a deity in a spiritual sense, so to speak. Sure, but one of my favorite professors back in the day always said, show me your checkbook, I'll show you your God. Mm-hmm. What do you invest in, right? What are the things? I mean, for some people, it's Domino's Pizza. I mean, put it this way: if I hate to tell you, newsflash, like Beth is probably going to send out the pledge cards here in the next couple weeks, and if you can't raise your tithe because of your pledged allegiance to Domino's Pizza, right? I know that's totally a rude guilt trip, Pastor. You're tapping into my finances, right? Right? Well, set aside Domino's Pizza. How about the pledge? One that I see profoundly in the peer community, and not just peer, but I see it all the time here. Family. I know that's a tricky one. Mm-hmm. How would I ever dare say you should set aside family in the name of God? Let's go. You guys willing to go there? Should we try this one? Should we talk about this one? Because it's deeply enrooted in this community. How can family become a God over God? Activities? Potentially. Janet? How do I see it? How about the average churchgoer that is here once every 6 weeks considers themselves regular attenders of church? Well, why do we come to church? Fellowship of Christians. That's not a bad answer. Why do you come to church? Glorify God and build my faith. Those are decent answers. Why do you come to church? Because it refreshes you. You're all on the right track. Let's go back to Luther's definition of what the true church is. What is the church? We did call it the vineyard today, didn't we? For Luther, what is the church? Where the gospel is preached and the sacraments are rightly administered. Period. Everything else is adiaphora, which is a fancy word of things to help us feel better, things to make us feel a little more righteous, and doctrine and rules and regulations to help keep us in check. Often and almost always man-created, correct? The church is where the gospel is heard and the sacraments are administered. Back to my question, why do you come to church? To hear the gospel. And I'm not saying make it about Pastor Craig. I'm not saying to listen to the pastor preach. By the way, that you do, you are. In all honesty, my number one role is to preach to you. Number one. If you ever have a call committee, put a list of priorities, and preaching the gospel is not at the top, they probably don't have an understanding of what the church is supposed to be, right? It is for you to hear the gospel. Why do you need to hear the gospel? Janet, what were you saying? You need to hear it to keep you going. You need to be refreshed, meaning you need to hear that you are a sinner, but you've received what? Mercy. And receiving that mercy is good news. Can take some weight off your shoulders so that you can go the 6 3/4 of the rest of the days of the week ahead of you, right? Right? So back to my question, or Janet, you asked the question, how do I see the possibility of family becoming the God instead of God? Well, let's remember this. I love my daughters dearly. Love my daughters dearly. Are they the creator or the created? Yeah, created. My wife and I love each other, and God blessed us with the opportunity to have what? Children, right? If all of a sudden every single decision that we are making, every choice we make is putting who at the center? Elise and Madeline. If every hour of our life is centered around Elise and Madeline, if every single dime in our bank account is centered on Elise and Madeline, if my emotions fluctuate completely and utterly because of Elise and Madeline, or because of the football game that they are participating in, or the dance recital they are participating in, if all of my being is focused on Elise and Madeline, is it possible that maybe, just maybe, I'm expressing a disbelief that God is the one that should be at the center of that faithful relationship? I don't know if you guys noticed, do you guys ever read the church signs? You guys ever read the church sign? Do you know who puts those signs up? That's her little ministry. She likes to come over here on Fridays or Saturdays and puts a sign up. There was one that she put on the outer side that she did it, and she was fascinated. She sits out here on the curb to wait for Ellie to come down the sidewalk after school. And you've seen students sit there and read them, right? And there was one that she had. What was it about Hulu and Netflix or something? Yeah. Have you read the Bible yet? Cancel your social media. Shut off your phones. Accomplish this before you go back to them. And some people, I've actually heard a few comments about that people, they said, I've never really thought about that. You even watched one student do what? They looked at it, shook their head, rolled their eyes, and walked away. Right? Right? If we can't even find 15 minutes in our day to devote, to be in devotion, to read God's word, to be in prayer, all because of my family's schedule, is there a possibility I'm expressing disbelief in you shall have no other gods before me? See that? Yeah, if you're putting your, say it again, Nancy.
You're making an idol of yourself. You're more making yourself more important than God if you put all of these things and your time and your energy ahead of learning and hearing the word.
Sure, sure. I think it can be used as a tool for good, but I think it's more damaging than it is positive, the invention of social media. Well, it's a time waster, but how oftentimes do you actually hear someone bare their soul on Facebook? Now, most of the time we're posting pictures about what? Vacations, kids, all the things we've done for ourselves, right? We're creating an image, and I'm not saying, like I said, it can be done well by some, but oftentimes not. I oftentimes, especially when I was in Hill City, I used to actually use my Facebook account. I can't tell you how many times I'd have parishioners ask me, send me the friendship request. And oftentimes I'll hit accept, but then I'll send a nice little message. You do realize your pastor now gets to see everything you post, right? Not so sure I want to see what everyone posts about their personal lives. And not only that, is it all honesty? It's only a piece, right? Janet, does that sort of answer your question? I think also the great challenge of navigating the schedules. It took me some time when I first moved here to understand just how transient our community is on the weekends. You can't just go down to the ball fields 5 miles away to play a game of baseball. You got to drive all the way to Rapid City or Sioux Falls. That creates its own challenge. I'm not going to necessarily speak and say that in and of itself is sin, no. But do you know how many families operate by thinking that they need to be in everything to the point that they don't know how to prioritize the opportunity to hear the good news? Right? That's kind of what I'm getting at, Janet. Right? So yes, even family can become an idol by all means. Let's move on. What is the second commandment? What's that? Do you want it? Do you want to read it for us, Carmen? Where are we at? Where are we at? You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in the heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the third and the fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the thousandth generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. Next, you shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. How could that be an expression of disbelief? Right. If someone curses your name, do you feel very respected? Do you believe that they are honoring just who you are and what you represent? Do you think God thinks anything less of it? You know, I tell you this. Yes, we've made some mistakes in our household. We've got some swear words that have happened. But my daughters know very clearly that the GDs and the JCs are very much off limits. Right? Do you guys know what I mean by GD and JC? I don't even want to say any more than that. Right? We don't use the Lord's name in vain. Why? Because the Lord says so. Remember the Sabbath day. Keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male, your female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. You know, when we choose to live our lives where we don't even have Sabbath, was Sabbath given as a law command, or was it given as a gift? Oh, both. True, right? I mean, because God commands it, we ought to listen. But why? Remember, who's the context? Who's hearing this for the very first time? Moses, but who is Moses sharing this with for the very first time? Former slaves. Did they get a day off? Ever? No. And God gives them a gift, right? So when we choose not to, by the way, you know, we have this really inward way of thinking. When we talk about our Sabbath, all about me, all about my rest, all about my self-care. Yeah, that's needed, but really, if you remember what I just read, who is it about? As we rest, we give thanks, and who gave us the gift to do it? As we rest, we think about all that God has given. As we rest, we worship that Lord. We worship our Lord. We give thanks. And we hear the what? Right? Because in the midst of our work, we are broken. We have messed up. And we receive that forgiveness and that gift, right? So what's an expression of disbelief there? Run ourselves ragged. And as we run ourselves ragged, why are we doing it? Or who are we doing it for? Did the Lord ask you to run yourself ragged every day of the week? He certainly did not. So why do we do it? Who are we serving? Ourselves, right? We are. I know, it's controversial. We don't like to talk about these things from time to time, but it's true. I'm not going to keep going through how about honor your father and mother? No, that's a good one. How do we express disbelief in that? Well, the obvious is not honoring our father and mother, right? Luther took it to another level. He talked about all expressions of authority in our lives, right? And now I also love the pastoral care moments where we hear, well, what about pastor, I had a horrible father or mother. Let's also remember that law to honor the father or mother, God also has just as many commands, if not more, for a father or mother to raise their children appropriately with love and compassion and care. It is mutual, right? But in the midst of that mutual relationship, are we called to honor each other? Yeah. How about adultery? It's a great one that we want to talk about in the commandments. How is infidelity an expression of disbelief? Put our needs, put our wants, our expectations. It's a disbelief that who God placed in our life was enough, right? And it's disbelief that the work that we ought to put into that relationship is fruitful, right? So are we seeing that sin is beyond the flea bites? Sin is much more deeper than that. What are other ways that, okay, well, let's turn it into a case study on the sermon. Let's talk about the vineyard. What was the sin there? Not honoring the master and his representatives. Yeah, let's go to the Isaiah 5, which doesn't even talk about the tenants coming. Who's the planter of the vineyard? Let's be bold, folks. Let's not make this too hard. Either I really sucked at preaching this morning and you heard nothing, or you guys are terrified to give the wrong answer, right? I think it's safe to say this is a safe space. If you mess up, it will graciously, compassionately correct, right? Who's the planter of the vineyard? God. Okay, thank you. And why did God do it? The gracious God. He's a creator, right? He wanted to create. Yeah. Why did God create the earth? Only God knows. But I'd like to assume that he wanted to create something. He created. He created the creatures. He created the vineyard. He created, in fact, if you look back at the metaphor, the allegory that comes with it, the vineyard, some historians have talked about the vineyard was, in Isaiah specifically, goes back to the Garden of Eden. He created this beautiful garden with all that Adam and Eve would ever need, right? And what was their role? Solely, what was the only command they had? Technically two. Don't eat of that one tree. But really, what was the one task that they were called to do? Take care of the garden, right? He let Adam be a little creative. He allowed Adam to be a co-creator and help name the things. That was fancy. I mean, when you think about it, what's in a word? Monkey, right? Where did you come up with that one, Adam, right? Sloth. Whale. I don't know. I'm just having fun with it. But God allowed God gave some creativity in that creation, right? And he allowed it, and he set Adam and Eve apart. Created us to be in his image, right? To be in that vineyard, to take care of it. But what happens? Something goes awry, right? Sin. And if you guys notice also that sin, it ends up coming with consequences. Adam and Eve are cast out. The first step of mercy is that they actually didn't die right away, right? They were still allowed to live life, but life was not going to be easy, right? They were cast out, and there are the cherubim and the seraphim, the angels guarding the walls around the garden, so to speak, so that they could not enter back into it. And out there, Adam has to work the earth, right? And what does he have to battle? Thistles and thorns. And what happens to Eve? What are her consequences? The pains of childbirth, right? Pains of childbirth. So we hear that story. But then that story becomes not just a story about the creation and Adam and Eve. It also, as it is for Isaiah, becomes Israel's story, right? They're taken out of Egypt. The vine is, in fact, we even heard that in the opening verse that Nancy read in Isaiah 5. The vine comes out of Egypt. And where is it planted? The land of Canaan. There the Lord establishes a new garden. But what happens? He wanted grapes. What did he get? Stinking grapes, wild grapes, rebellious grapes. Rebellious grapes that were more interested in what or who? Themselves. And boy, did they get atrocious pretty quick. Right? You think that we are a struggling culture? Nothing on this earth is new. We do have the capacity to take it to a different level, though, don't we? Mm-hmm. So who wants to talk about sin in our last few minutes? Where do we see sin right now? Let's go beyond the flea bites, guys. Where do we see the vineyard falling apart? What's that? Even affects the church, doesn't it? Remember who the vineyard was given to, right? We talked about that this morning. Who is the Lord handing the vineyard over to? To the church. Even the gospel is telling us that even the church has the ability to be infected, right? So where's sin there? Not preaching the gospel, sure. Good thing that locked in, huh? You guys are so shy around the subject. If you want to go back to Luther's time, what's that? Not believing the Bible is God's word, right? Which is fascinating to me. It really truly is, because when the church was started, they gathered in worship over who? Jesus, right? And as this was happening, the New Testament writers, with fire and fury, are discerning the Spirit and putting pen to parchment, putting ink to parchment, right? And not only that, what are they also teaching? They're going back to their Torah, right? Even the Jews who are converting to Christianity still know their scriptures. Even the Gentiles, the non-Jews, are still learning the historical past of this living God, right? The God of Israel. And as that's taking place, we have Peter, we have John, we have Paul, ruthlessly working hard, writing God's word, right? And they're bringing it to the table. And what are they doing it? Reading it, and teaching it, and preaching it, right? Why? Because God commanded them to do it, right? And so what do we do today? Make it warm and fuzzy and keep everybody. Instead of what? Instead of nailing it to the cross.
This is the way life's supposed to be. Not everything is going to be warm and fuzzy.
Right. Right. I love you guys dearly. Do I need to come here to feel warm and fuzzy? Do I? No. I mean, it still kind of pains me. Like the last 2 times we've done surveys, people talk about we need to be more hospitable. I want to know what that means. I really do. I want to know what that means. Of course you should be met with a kind smile. Of course we should have some relatively decent coffee, I suppose. Of course that you should have easy access and information on how to know what are we doing and opportunities to get involved. Of course. But I'm not really sure I understand anymore what it means to be hospitable. Does it mean to be warm and fuzzy? Because last I checked, Terry, what did you just say?
Just that the church is trying to, instead of preach the Bible, it's trying to say, okay, well, this is okay. You don't want, feathers and
Mm-hmm.
pretty much
Yeah.
in the church that you need to come for what you're coming for, not what you learn about God, not come here to.
You need to come to learn about God, not to feel better about yourself. Well, and to feel better about yourself in receiving the good news. And receiving what? Forgiveness, right? Right? Let's go back to what I said in my sermon, that statistic. Isn't that a fascinating statistic? That all across the denominations in America, within the first few weeks after 9/11, the church attendance did what? Exploded by over 300%. Exploded. Why? Is it because people wanted to feel warm and fuzzy? What's that? They needed the word. They were afraid. They wanted to know what God is doing. They wanted to know why God would allow this. They wanted to know how God is going to tell us how to get revenge, right? I mean, even the dark, sinful side of ourselves. We wanted to know something. We wanted to know God, and we also probably wanted to be in community in some way, shape, or form, right? Right? I don't think warm and fuzzy was at the top of people's list in that moment. I think it was probably warmer and more fuzzy to be at home embracing our loved ones and our kids as we watch the news of all the families that lost theirs, right? They needed to hear an ounce of hope of what God might be up to in all of this. And as I shared, how did we fail? In the grand scheme of things, we didn't talk about it. Why? Because when we're comfortable, the last thing you need to do is be afflicted. But when Martin Luther entered the pulpit, he said, when one gives the gospel to its fullest, by the way, not the warm, fuzzy part of Jesus, when the gospel is given to its fullest, it comforts the afflicted, or yes, it comforts the afflicted. No. It afflicts the comfortable and comforts the afflicted. That's hard work, isn't it? And that's the burden that the preacher gets to hold. It's my burden. Every single week. Every single week I have to temper what I can say. Every single week I try really hard not to just give you my opinion. Oh, I can give you my opinions. And if you guys, when I shut the microphone off and I hit stop on the live stream and you want to know my opinions, we can do that, right? Right? But it's not my job to give you my opinion. It's my job to give you what? God-given gospel truth and answer. Right? And that's hard to do because sometimes that gospel ruffles some feathers. Sometimes it afflicts the comfortable. And by golly, we'd rather remain comfortable, wouldn't we? Why shouldn't we? I mean, heck, we just said we want the Lord wants the harvest of all the fruit. He wants the fruit for himself. He is a jealous God, right? He didn't want all the fruit so that we can all turn into gods ourselves. And that's one of the tricks that we're dealing with sin. Self-idolatry is probably one of the prominent ones these days. Right? Anyone else want to be bold? As you look around, what is sin? Where are you guys seeing it? Where are you hearing it? How are you? Mark.
You brought 9/11.
Okay.
And in the context of how it brought people to church.
Okay.
We're talking about gospel, and we're talking about Levites. I mean, yesterday, what happened coming up out of Gaza? Is that a Levite? To me, it's a big deal.
For the sake of the live stream, I'm going to try to repeat what you said. You said, talking about 9/11, talking about the challenges that came with that, and now we look at the news yesterday, like Gaza and Israel. Is that just a flea bite?
Yeah, compared
Or,
to 9/11. I mean, to me, it's significant. I know it's not a 9/11.
well, actually, what was really interesting is on the news last night, I heard a news reporter say yesterday for Israel was a 9/11.
Yes.
Right? Right? No. So was it a flea bite? That's a great question, Mark. Let's help Mark out. Let's work on this together for the last couple minutes. How could the actions of yesterday, and by the way, we're going to say on both sides. We're not going to reduce this just to Gaza, Palestine, Hamas. We also hear in the news that Israel has its deep, profound sins in the midst of the chaos in Israel, right? Let's take it further. Let's talk about sin. Let's not just reduce it to flea bites. What is the sin? The struggle for power. The struggle amongst hate. Possibility of greed. Some might argue a possibility of equality, right? One side of the fence will talk about humanitarian concerns, right? And the other side of the fence will say, but this is the chosen land of God. Right? It's profoundly complicated. It's beyond politics. It's beyond military might. It goes into sin, right? It goes into sin about what God has given you today is enough. Give us this day our daily what? Okay. And that sin right there will unite every single human being on this earth. Right? For those that have much, what are we called to do with it? Right? And I'm not talking socialism when we say share. Right? Let's quote Spider-Man, with great power comes great what? Responsibility, right? Right. With great blessing calls what? The possibility to help another neighbor who could never indulge in such a blessing, right? It's not about bringing equality. It's not saying that, Mark Underberg, you need to sacrifice everything you have received in the work that God has called you into for the sake of someone else to have the equal gift. It's because your neighbor needs a helping hand from time to time, right? Mark, you're a gracious man. And that's Mark's private business, but Mark is a gracious man. Many of you are gracious people, right? With great resources, thank you, Lord, for my daily bread. And this daily bread is enough. And you know what? If I had the ability to share, I ought to do that, right? I ought to do that in some capacity. kind of blows my mind how many times that I have to get up and announce, and Kelly has to send out emails asking for an ounce of assistance when we've got the youth group going to the banquet this week, right? Fortunately, people have stepped up. It takes Sign Up Genius, a software-based tool for us to create our food list that we know that we have the food available to us. But by golly, if we're going to ask people to show up, God, sometimes it's pulling teeth. Why? Because we aren't balancing that daily bread and we aren't balancing our time to serve the neighbor, right? We fall into sin, right? And how about those that maybe don't have enough in their perception? I don't have as much as my neighbors across the border or down the street have. And because of that, I become what? Sometimes jealous, sometimes angry, sometimes full of hate, right? I will also say this, after being in Israel 4 years ago, it's profoundly deeper than what the West understands it in line items. We understand it in resourcefulness. What we will never understand is it's also truly and profoundly about religion, spirituality. And that's something that even our professor, when we were over there, he said, you guys in the West will never understand it because you have a gift, and that was called the freedom of religion. Meaning we have the ability to worship the God we call God and not be brought out into the streets or have rockets fired at you for it. He said that is also your curse. Why might he say that? What's that? Because what? I think it's much more deeper than appreciation. I think it's exactly the sin that we are living in right now. It allows us to what? Take it for granted. We don't even worship. Right? You know, if the average person, if you were to ask them what keeps them up at night, it's not about whether or not my faith is going to get me killed tomorrow. Right? There's places all over the world where that's one of the top fears for some. But I would also say that the faithful amongst the faithful, they don't fear it anymore. They just embrace it. That's a real possibility, right? That's something that we don't face here yet, and I hope we never do, right? But our great curse is that because we have all this ability, this beautiful palette of possibility, over the generations, it's kind of reduced. It's been reduced to nothing of serious need, right? Which, by the way, is an expression of disbelief, right? Any last questions? I want to give you guys time for questions. I really hope you guys actually have some. Reg? Okay. Reg repeating his wasn't really a question, a statement, you know, football, basketball, all these activities has the possibility of becoming a new religion, so to speak. Hunting, fishing, right? Right? Well, what prevents it from becoming a new religion, Reg? But what would prevent that? Perspective. Right? Your ability to be in nature and to hunt and to fish. By the way, I love those things, right? Your ability to be on the sidelines watching your kids grow up and be successful and use some of their talent. Are you going to ever hear me bash that? No. But what do we have to do? Keep it in perspective. Find the balance. Why? To worship who? Versus who? Creator versus created. If there's anything you can walk away with today in regards to the topic of sin, remember these words: creator versus created. Who are you worshiping most? Who are you investing your time, your money, your resources? Are you investing it on all things of the created, or are we invested in the creator? our ideologies. Let's take it even beyond the things in our hands and the things in our accounts, the things in our driveways or our garages. Take it away from the material, because by the way, that's all created things, right? Let's go deeper. Let's go into our conscience, into our mind, in our hearts. What are we invested in? Are we invested in ideologies that lift up the created, or on ideologies that lift up the creator? Do we see that little fine line? Right? The things we do that focus on the creator are the things that I think are what produce the fruit in the vineyard. The things that focus on the created are things that often become, well, the devil, you can find all throughout Scripture, are things that the devil uses distractions. The devil is really good about getting you to worship what, Mark? Shiny objects, right? Any of you love to fish? Any of you love to fish? What I love about a real seasoned fisherman is their ability to know which kind of lures to use under different weather conditions, right? You don't want it to be too shiny, right? You don't want it to be too shiny because it's too good to be true, right? Right? But yet you need just enough glint. You need just enough glimmer going through the water to what? To get him to bite, right? Right? The devil uses the created as a distraction. Ooh, shiny stuff, right? Versus what? The creator. Right? Any other questions? What do I see is what is at stake, or what is going on across churches, across the land, and what is it going to take to reform it? For humanity to open their eyes? We're entering into the land of Craig's opinion. But at risk of answering it, I will say, at the surface level, profound struggle. And the reason is because humanity is very cyclical. I don't think we have the ability to be any more creative than our ancestors of the past. Why do you think that is? Because God doesn't want us to be gods. Right? Even in human past, in the different cycles, let's also remember, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, let's not reduce our human ancestors to being idiots. They were profoundly intelligent, right? One of the things that Carmen and I discovered when we went to the Ark this summer, the Ark and the Creation Museum, was to look at the science behind how these things were built and how it was done. Any of us in engineering or come from an engineering background? Some of us, Terry, I know. Terry is my proverbial engineer at Men's. You guys, with technology, we've been able to take things to another level, to a point, but let's not denigrate our ancestors of the past. They were incredibly intelligent with the things they had. If you wanted that, go to Egypt. Go look at the pyramids, right? Fascinating. When I was in Israel, when you get to see these aqueducts built, and you get to see these different things, our ancestors were profoundly intelligent. And by the way, the things they built are still standing. Last I checked, brand new house construction today, you're creaking within 5 years, aren't you? No offense, right? I can walk into someone's, I don't know how many houses I've been invited into as a pastor, and I see those turd brown painted refrigerators and avocado green painted refrigerators that say Kelvinator and Maytag on them. They were built better, amen? Let's stop saying that we are so progressively profound and talented. We are in so many ways. Technology has been such a blessing in so many ways. But our response and our use of it is no better than our ancestors. Right? Let's get really controversial. The Nazi Party, was phenomenally intelligent on what they studied and the things they learned. Now, how they used that intelligence was atrocious, right? You go back to Israel's history, not a whole lot different, right? So to answer your question, I think, honestly, I'm going to go out so far as to say we are in the midst of another Reformation, so to speak. You know, I've shared with you guys in other adult ed series the 500-year cycle, which was introduced to me. I never thought of it this way until my senior year in seminary. Dr. Walt Sundberg, one of the greatest church history professors in the American Lutheran Church, he shared that with us. 500 years ago was what? Was what? Martin Luther, the Reformation, right? And by the way, what he's talking about with those 500-year cycles is it's not just evolution of the church, it's where religion, spirituality, and the culture clash. And the clash that comes of it is profound, but the change that comes with it is just as profound, if not more profound. So 500 years ago was the Protestant Reformation, right? You had a monk, an Augustinian monk, in a little town in Germany. What came of it? An explosion of change in the church, all because he really was terrified of God in the way that it was taught to him, and he really saw the corrupt bankruptcy of the faith of its time with things like indulgences and the ways and the standards and the lack of accountability of the clergy, right? What did it do? It created profound reform. What also came of it was a unified written language for the German nation. It united the Saxons, the lords of Saxony. It led to what became Germany. It led to a public educational system that allowed people of all ages and all socioeconomic possibilities to be educated. And how did they educate them? With Scripture, not public school curriculum, right? With Scripture. Their faith was 90% of their education. The way that they were taught to read and write was the Bible and the Catechism, right? Profound change that came with it. 500 years before the Reformation, what happened? Started the Crusades. You think that changed the world? Absolutely. 500 years before that, the Roman Empire completely and utterly converted from the Roman pagan gods that they all worshipped under Constantine into what is known as Christendom. Think about that. Think about the Roman Empire. Remember the ones that hung Jesus on the cross? Yeah, no, they completely flipped, and it became the religion of the empire. 500 years before that, it's the beginnings of the church. Right? 500 years before that, modern-day Judaism is coming to fruition out of the release of the capture of the Babylonian exile. 500 years before that, the Babylonian exile. You guys see the ramifications that come with this? So here we are. I mean, just to really add to the point, October 31st, 1517 was the hanging of the 95 Theses. That wasn't exactly what started the Reformation, but it was the beginning, right? 1521, Martin Luther had to defend the faith at the Diet of Worms. It's 2023. It's 502 years later after that. Are you really that amazed? Or are you really that shocked that here we are having the church feuds that we're having in clash with the culture, trying to defend what possibly is truth and what isn't? So to answer your question, I think we're in the midst of a reformation. But I will also say the thing that was always central in all of those movements was what? A knowledge and adherence to what? There's a little red book sitting next to most of you in the pew right now. The Bible. Scripture. Scripture. It's also fascinating then, the vast majority of the other religions in the world, they will die defending their scriptures. Each main religion in the world has a scripture of sorts. Islam calls it what? The Quran. Judaism calls it what? The Torah. Christianity calls it what? the Bible. Hinduism and Buddhism, they have their own scriptures too. Every other religion in the world will defend to the death its scriptures. But modern day, especially American Christianity, we let them collect dust. And we know nothing in them. We might say we do. And the tough reality is the vast majority of the lectionary text that you hear preached is maybe a sliver of all of Scripture, right? There's a reason why we try to put a lot of emphasis in the church here on some Bible study and adult ed, so that we can at least understand what was God saying, what was God up to, what is our response, what is the gift we receive, what is the promises we receive. Why do we put such an emphasis on the sacraments? Why? Because those are the promises given to us where we believe that God is present in and through it, right? So it's vitally important that we know that. It's vitally important that we share that. It's vitally important that we invite others into it. Even if we don't necessarily know all the right answers, even if they don't know the answers, just still invite anyways. Give them the warm, fuzzy feelings as they get here, right? And let me do all the damage by giving truth, right? Right? Good question. All throughout history, when things get really comfortable and humanity thinks that it knows more than God, God has a really profound way of reminding them that they're not. Now, I'm not saying that to stoke doom and gloom or sound apocalyptic. I'm not. By the way, if you remember what the word apocalypse comes from, the Greek word apocalyptic or apocalyptos actually means revelation. Do I think God is trying to reveal something to us? Yeah. Any other last questions? Stand on truth. Please know that truth is not subjective. Carmen and I were watching, I think it was a stand-up comedian one time, and he's a faith-based stand-up comedian. He was talking about, right now we're in the generation where everything is subjective. You know, it's like postmodernism, where Nancy can say that this is her truth, Terry can say that this is his truth, and then Arlene can say, well, this can be your truth, that can be your truth. I'm not sure that there is a truth. And then the best response is say, oh, is that true? Right? Because the argument, quite frankly, the argument is being built that there is no subjective truth. That everything is subjective. There is no longer an objective truth. That's false, is it not? It's inherent in our being the moment we come out of our mother's womb. There is some ethic, some ethos that we live within, right? And we can't let that go. We can't let that go. Should it be fought for? Yeah. Should it be fought for with kindness, compassion, truth, scriptural intelligence? Yeah. Yeah. I think that's enough in my opinion, my belief, on how we respond, but it's getting difficult for sure. And the church is very much in the brunt of it, for sure. Just like it was 500 years ago. Anything else? If not, let's close in prayer. Gracious God, each and every day we wrestle with our sins. And it's not just something we've done, Lord. It's not just something we've said. It's not some shiny thing we've chased after. Those certainly are sins, but Lord, our sin is truly a disbelief in you. You are a jealous God. You want our hearts, you want our minds, you want all of our being to be in worship of you, worship with you, to be there in the vineyard, being a part of the fruit and the harvest, so that all may be fed. Gracious God, we err so many times in thinking that we know better, or even in our ignorance when we don't know what to think. We are more interested in listening or worrying about what others think, Lord. And that too is an expression of disbelief. We do know what to believe. You give it to us each and every day. You, through your Son, have saved us. You have died on the cross so that our sins can be forgiven. You've given us the greatest gift of mercy. And help us, Lord, to live in response to that. Let us live our lives in response, not because our salvation depends on it, but because our neighbors need it. In your name we pray. Amen.